This is Leaders in the Trenches, and your host today is Gene Hammett.
Hi, my name's Gene Hammett. I am the host of Leaders in the Trenches, and my question for you today is, how do you create a culture that thrives? I know I've been doing a lot about culture lately, but it's just so important for you to get the culture right. It's not squishy. It's not something that you can't intentionally manage or lead if you put your attention to it. But the problem is too many people think it just is there. It is what it is. And I disagree with that so much. And so how do you lead a culture that really does thrive from the inside out? Well, first of all, you don't focus on just the numbers. The numbers are an important part of the company and the growth, but you don't want people to feel like cogs in a wheel. You want them to feel like you care for them. You want them to feel supported. You want them to feel like they're growing, that they're adding value to this world. And all of those things, if you can do that well, if you can pour into them as a leader, and that culture really supports that, those numbers that you want to focus on and you want them to move forward, they move forward very strongly. I've seen it happen. I've done the research. I've talked to the companies. I've been in companies, my own companies. This really does matter. People matter. And so you've got to create a culture where people are able to thrive. And we talk about that today with one of the leaders over at Adroll. And this leader just really is an amazing guy. I'm going to pull up my notes here for a second. He is such an amazing person. I really feel like Aaron Bell is able to have this conversation because they've grown so fast. They've created some cutting edge solutions that a lot of people have tried to mimic and they haven't been able to. And they are on the edge of technology, which means they have to have employees that are willing to think for themselves. And Aaron and I talk about what does that mean and how do you do it? And all inside this interview here at Leaders in the Trenches. So here's the interview with Aaron. Hey, Aaron, how are you?
Very well. Thanks for having me, Gene.
Well, I'm excited to have you here at Leaders in the Trenches, and we're going to talk about culture. We're going to talk about people, and I'm going to give you a chance to let our audience know from your own perspective a little bit about you and who you serve there at Adroll.
Yeah, so a little bit about Adroll. First of all, we were founded in 2007 with a mission to bring advertising to brands of all sizes. Back when we started, the advertising world was very different. The advertisements you saw online weren't so different than the ones you saw offline. You know, a typical campaign would be Nike running a sponsorship on the front page, and there wasn't much space for all the emerging brands out there. And so we set out to change that. And fast forward to today, we're now the most widely adopted marketing tech platform out there for brands of all sizes. And we have two business units, one focused on consumer called Adroll, and then a sister brand called Rollworks, which is focused on B2B advertisers. We started the company in 2007. My background before Adroll was almost all engineering. So I come from a very, I love to build things. And when I began as CEO here, I can admit I was pretty far out of my comfort zone. And I had to think of ways to adapt my background, you know, building code, writing programs, and software into like, how do you build a great organization where people thrive? And I very quickly came to believe that the people are everything. If you get the people right, you can just about get everything else wrong and still be okay. And so it all started there.
Well, let's dive into that because that's the reason we're here to talk. You've grown Adroll. Can you give us any kind of numbers or number of people where your growth has been?
Yeah, sure. We have about 500 employees at the company. We're in a number of global offices. In the United States, we're San Francisco, Utah, New York, Chicago, and internationally, we have a hub in Dublin, an office in London, and then Sydney and Tokyo. We are continuing to grow very fast as a company. About a third of the company is focused on engineering and resources. So we've had to deal with a lot of, I remember back in 2012 when we went from like one office into a bunch of offices, and that was sort of a pivotal moment for us. As we expand into different offices and different places, how do we make sure things the culture doesn't go sideways? I felt like the biggest risk at that point because we were such a connected company. How do we make sure we don't start going in a mediocre direction?
Well, let's go right into that. You mentioned earlier that you wanted to create a place where people could thrive and that where people were very important to the growth of the overall business. And I find this to be a debate. A lot of companies will say it's customer first or employee first. How would you guys phrase that within your company?
Well, I think they're sort of connected in some ways. Like I said, you got to start with your employees. Everything is derived from your employees. If your employees aren't clued in to the right values, like we have a value around do right by the customer and the community, actually, which is customers and employees. Unless you have a way of setting the direction, setting values for your employees, they'll never really know naturally that at our company we prioritize spending time with the customers. So it all stems from the culture you set.
Well, the way I phrase it within growth cultures, which would be different than a performance culture, is it's employees first, but it's customer centric.
Yes.
Could you agree to that, or?
That completely resonates with me. Yeah.
When you said you wanted to create a place to thrive, and we know that changes when you have 5 employees versus 500. So I don't know, can you walk us through some of the inflection points of how culture has shifted for Adroll?
Sure. I think, yeah, there's like that Dunbar number where I think it's 150. There's only 150 people that you can really know intimately and know their names. And once you get past that number, things really change. We had that same sort of crises when we moved from like 1 floor to 2 floors or open up international offices here. And there's an Onion headline I love, which says, boss wants friendly, relaxed office by Friday. So it's like culture isn't something you can mandate from the top. It's hard for a CEO to go and say, like, here's the culture that we're going to have. And like, it's like bring tablets down. You really need to, as a leader, culture follows a leader. So you need to set the example, I feel. That's only kind of really half of it. You really need to figure out ways to like involve all your employees and get them to kind of live those ways too. One thing that we did, it wasn't really too deliberate, but it ended up being really important, is we came up with 6 spirit animals for the Adroll values. I'm actually wearing my one of them today, which is a jellyfish, which stands for transparency. And for whatever reason, that really brought the company values to life. And instead of having an employee handbook with your values that you kind of give to new employees and it kind of gathers dust on it, you have these different mascots or icons, and there's probably a million ways of doing this, but you're able to evoke those different mascots in different decisions you make, or projects, or even teams or working groups, and people have really enjoyed that part of the company. So, and when we've done surveys, a really large percent of the company actually understands the values and says we live by them. So I feel like that was really important, codifying the values in a way that was like really useful to the company.
And I've never heard that before. I mean, we've seen the values on a wall when we walk in, just words. Maybe there's a picture that goes with it, but you guys got creative and had these spirit animals. They're even on a T-shirt, right?
Yeah.
How did that come about?
I think we were just some of us brainstorming. I happen to come from Seattle. That's where I grew up, and my parents live near Issaquah. And there's a Native American totem pole nearby. So I think some of it was actually inspired by kind of my childhood, where you could have these different mascots represent, or different animals represent different ideas that I thought was pretty interesting. And and then it was just we painted a mural that was at the front door of our office with the different icons on them.
Awesome. When you think about transparency now, and I hear this a lot, so I call it radical transparency. Would you say that your transparency is radical?
I would say we're radically transparent. Silicon Valley had an episode where they were making fun of radical candor, but we try to be radically transparent, which is good. Actually, it's kind of fun. There's like all these values are sort of linked together. Our first value is hire great people and help them grow. Hiring great people is not a unique thing in our industry, but to help them grow as their first value is important. And I actually think helping people grow, helping each other grow, is really tied to transparency. Like if you have a manager who goes to an employee and is just like radically direct with them all the time, it's hard. That can be a challenging relationship.
Yeah.
It can come off as abusive. But if those two people are working in a company where they know how important personal growth is, it's much more likely for that employee to see that transparency, that feedback as coaching, that my manager is really in my corner, my company is really in my corner, they're trying to get me from A to B, it's good feedback for me. And then we try to do a lot with the other direction too. So actually, if you don't mind me talking about this a little bit more, we use technology a lot in transparency. Every Friday, we have an all hands, and we encourage people to post questions on a Q&A board, which allows anonymous questions. We encourage people to post fears, uncertainties, and doubts. And we have a view, it's much better to confront people's ideas and talk about them in the open rather than let them fester behind the scenes or at the bar after work. And I can actually plug, we recently, some employees who are at Adroll have built a product called Jellyfish, which is a Slack extension, which allows anybody in Slack to run an interview, or not an interview, like a IMA type of Reddit style Q&A with someone, which you can do before a meeting or before an all hands, and lets people ask questions in Slack and vote them up and down in preparation for a meeting or an all hands.
Yeah, I love the fact that you guys have embraced this so much in many different levels. And, you said something about helping employees thrive. You just said help them grow. Are there anything specifically that you found really works well to help employees grow?
So we in Silicon Valley, there's this competition for talent. The dot-com days or the early 2000s, it was like all about perks, like how much free food, free lunches, pool tables, those sorts of things. And we've sort of decided early on, we'd rather spend $1 on training and in investing in somebody, and rather than on some sort of perk that's kind of more temporary. So we try to put our money there. And at Adroll, we teach thousands of classes per year. We have employees teach classes, maybe on like how to use Tableau, or how to use something how to understand something in our domain. We bring in a lot of external teachers too, on almost like virtual MBA type stuff. We also have the whole body type of stuff where we've had teachers come in and teach Zumba classes or other sorts of health related pretty frequently. So there's over 3,000 classes taught a year here for a 500-person company.
That's pretty impressive, and I can see how that would make people want to grow. When you think about culture, what do you think about? Like, what is the core essence of culture for your company come down to?
Yeah, I think there's 3 pillars around culture. There's community, which is how do people interact? How do they get along? How inclusive is your environment? How comfortable people asking questions? Do people actually enjoy coming to work? They want to spend time together. Are they going to recommend their friends to come there? And I think Adroll has done really well in that category. And as we grow as a company, the areas where we're needing to grow the most are around performance, which is, do you have a performance culture? Do you have a way of setting goals? Is your leadership telling you what mountain you're going to climb? Oftentimes people define culture as like who gets promoted, who gets hired, who gets fired. They're so visible, and that really shows like what success looks like in your company. And I kind of define that as performance culture. And the last thing is like governance culture. And I feel like this is an area that really hasn't been, there's not a lot as a mid-stage, leader at a company. It's hard to find information about good governance at our size and stage, because you're at this awkward place between having, just being a bunch of people in one office or like in the back, in a garage somewhere versus being like a corporate company. Like if you want to make a change to the front page of the website, put different text on there, like who makes that decision? Does the CEO have to sign off on it? Is the product people, marketing, like what are the chains there? And I find almost every mid-stage company, it's really loosely defined. And so how do you deal with that? And how do you deal with communication outside of the reporting structure? So that's all about governance. How do you make decisions? And does everybody, speak the same language around decisions at your company?
I think one of the key elements I think in culture is, you have leadership and team, and then you also have systems. What kind of systems did you guys, really put weight into to help you support your culture and your people?
Yeah, so you definitely want, the CEO or leadership really has three responsibilities. Number one is they got to paint a bold vision of the future of the company. So everybody in the company really, like, imagine it all fitting on one sheet of paper. Everybody in the company should be able to recite that and make sure they're aligned with that, the top level. And then the CEO is also responsible for making sure there's money in the bank and setting the cultural tone, I think. And from there, I think it's good to have some sort of rhythm. Maybe not when you're just a really small upstart, but kind of getting towards the mid stages where, like, a quarterly system, even though you're not public, where there is goal setting and accountability around those goal settings, and trying to be as data driven in that goal setting as possible. For an early stage company, I run product today at Adroll. I think it's important that the goals are very much set on outcomes, like what metrics do you want to drive versus outputs. Outputs, like, for example, we need to ship product X on date Y. It's really hard. This is going back to the customer centricity. It's hard to really predict exactly, what your customers are going to want 6 months from now, as you kind of go on your journey. So we try to focus more on the metrics than the actual roadmap items. But having some sort of rhythm on a quarterly basis that kind of fits into, like, big thematic initiatives for the year is how we've always done it.
When I think about performance culture, though, there's a lot of times companies put too much emphasis on the numbers and the metrics, and the people begin to feel pressure for that. Have you noticed any of that when you guys talk about metrics, or how do you thwart against that?
Yeah, one thing, it's there's always this question of, do you tie people's compensation to performance? And I would say no. We try to keep them separate. The performance, like the goals you set. Let me take that back. Compensation should be tied to performance, of course. But when you're setting goals at a company, those are really supposed to be more of, stretch-based goals, thinking big, making sure you're not thinking too small, and, coming up with, like, a target. It'd be good if, you reach 60 to 70% of your goals, and making that part of the conversation when you do reviews, but making sure people, are setting goals quarterly. And it's also important to make sure those quarterly goals aren't just, focused on that one quarter, that you're actually, like, those quarterly goals fit into longer, like, 12-month themes, or else you could have people just trying to make their numbers look right for that one quarter.
Yeah. You don't want that short-term thinking, do you?
No.
When I think about your business, Adroll, and I see the technology and the marketing kind of intersecting together, I think innovation. So what do you guys do inside your culture that really drives or supports innovation?
There's a lot of different things that we do. From a product perspective, we really try to focus on doing a lot of customer discovery. Okay. That's things like we're interesting because Adroll is not a consumer product, meaning it can be a little more challenging to find potential customers. And so we have customer advisory boards that we built out, which are great. Sometimes your customer advisory boards can have a lot of early adopters on it, which maybe not are they're great because they like to try new things out and they're open to talk to you, but they might not represent who your ultimate long-term customer is. One thing that we've done in the last year is we have a sales team here, and we use a program called Chorus to record sales calls. And we get the whole product team in a room, and we play for them just almost like a random sales call that happened. And it's a way to hear the customer responding in kind of like an example situation about our product. And almost like a bunch of art students, we kind of critique what happened on the call, what was said, and try to get a view into the customer without actually even having a one-on-one conversation with the customer, which we found to be pretty interesting and spurring a lot of real good conversations.
Now, what do you think that you do within leadership that make people think it's okay for failure, to push boundaries and to push the edge of this? Is failure okay with you guys? Failure
is part of you can't learn anything if you're not failing at things. If you don't have products failing, if you don't have different initiatives failing, it means you're probably not taking too many risks. Like Peter Thiel said, if you're not uncomfortable, then you're probably not doing it right.
Yeah.
So it goes back to the values again. Hire great people and help them grow. There's a book we like a lot called Mindset, which is a pretty popular book in
Yeah.
education circles, but it cross applies into business quite a bit, and talks about how you set the conditions for helping people make mistakes. And one thing we've taken on recently is we do a fair bit of retrospectives. So, and you don't make, so retrospective is like, let's say you have a big project and it failed, instead of just kind of shelving it, moving on, it's good to break it down and really understand what happened. The problem is when you're at a company, everybody's of our stage, everybody's so busy, you don't want to formalize it too much. So at least creating some time and space and having some structure for looking back on things and making sure that you're actually taking the time to learn from your failures. And I think by people understanding the value in that process, then they're more likely to understand it's okay to make mistakes.
So of all the things I've asked you about today, what is one thing that you wish I would have asked you about culture as it relates to your success there at Adroll?
That's a good question, actually. One thing that you would have asked me about culture would be, one thing I think it's there's two things I like to talk about related to that. The first one is, how do you measure culture, which I think is really important. It's sort of like, it goes back to this idea I have where there's this, I think, a myth out there where as a company gets bigger, the culture gets worse. It gets more bureaucratic. It gets more stuffy. Things get slower. There's diseconomies of scale. And I am hell-bent on destroying that myth. So actually, as a company gets bigger, how do you make sure the company improves? And I think measurement's a big part of that. So we use software called Culture Amp. And we have, a lot of companies do this actually. Once a year, we have a big employee survey and it asks a bunch of questions about everything. Like how, will you be at the company in 3 years? What do you think about your salary? Do we have a diverse and inclusive environment? People answer those questions. And it allows us to, we basically really encourage the whole company to answer it. And then you get these results back and you're able to see across different departments and different geographies where the hotspots are. And where Adroll is a little different, where we do really well, is we really focus on addressing those hotspots. So we immediately launch different programs every year to help us improve those areas and improve the culture. And so being able to be really diagnostic about your culture and open about it can be really helpful with tools. And then the other thing I said is the question I would have, the one question, $1 million question is, do you think cultures can get better as a company grows in size? And I think we're in early days of, but I think there are a lot of economies of scale to actually improve a culture and have all kinds of different types of people at a company working together to create a great environment.
Well, I appreciate you going there with me because it's definitely something I want to give you a space to talk about what's most important for your culture. So Aaron, if our audience wanted to catch up with you and find out more about Adroll and whatnot, what's the best place for them to go?
I'm on Twitter, AARON, AAARON.
Yeah.
Or you can just send me an email. It's just my first name with 2 A's at adroll.com.
Perfect. Well, you guys, hopefully you enjoyed this interview as much as I have. Thanks for being here, Aaron.
Thanks for having me. Take care.
Fantastic. Hopefully you enjoyed that interview as much as I did. Took good notes. I took a lot of notes in there because I want my culture to thrive. I want my clients' culture to thrive. And I want the people that are inside these organizations to love what they do. I don't know if you know, my mission is I love Mondays. I really do. I just recently wrote this up. I love Mondays. And I want everyone else to love Mondays too. So what would it be like in your world if every one of your employees loved to come to work on Monday and Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, but they loved what they were doing? That's an organization that's thriving. So if I can help you with anything, make sure you reach out. As always, lead with courage, and I'll see you next time.